Hey, everybody. Welcome to The Right Side with Doug Billings. Thank you for listening to us on all of the major podcast platforms in the United States. We are on all of them. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, do it already. Hurry up. We are on all of them, whether it's Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever. We are out there. We are on all of them. The Right Side with Doug Billings. Look us up on your drive to and from work or whenever. We appreciate you listening. If you're watching us, you're on YouTube or Facebook or Rumble. We are now on Rumble, so head over to Rumble and subscribe to The Right Side with Doug Billings. On YouTube and Facebook, the same thing. You want to see the grandeur, the splendor, and the absolute magnificence, as well as listen to it, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you all for the emails. I've got so many I can't respond to all of them, and for the private messages offering prayers during my COVID experience. Yes, I've had the Chinese virus. I'm in day 13 today, so at the end of it, and I've had no symptoms, ladies and gentlemen, other than a loss of smell and a loss of taste for a few days. No major symptoms at all, never difficulty breathing, no cough, no fever. So I'm one of the 99.9%, right, where the virus is, in fact, the biggest nothing burger in the history of hysteria. But thank you for your prayers and your concerns during all of that. I am just fine, ladies and gentlemen. Today, let's make sure that we don't take our eyes off of the process here, folks. I'm going to talk a lot about process today. There has been, even today, even after yesterday's Electoral College vote, there is no officially elected President of the United States. It's not official yet, ladies and gentlemen. What we saw yesterday was just one of the items within the process of electing a president in the United States. The Electoral College met, but what no one else is reporting to you is that Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico all sent electors there to the Electoral College, and they all voted for the Trump-Pence ticket, ladies and gentlemen. This will end up being a contested election. Now, per the Constitution, this thing now that the Electoral College has voted, those votes are sealed. One copy has been delivered to the President of the Congress. Do you know who the President of the Congress is, ladies and gentlemen? His name is Mike Pence. The other copy has been delivered to the Library of Congress. And they are sealed. They will not be open. And per the Constitution now, this is all in the Constitution, they will not be opened until January 6th, when the votes are counted in a joint session of Congress. Now, if you're from Raytown, Missouri, that means that both houses, this House and the Senate, are together in a joint session of Congress, and they will tally the votes. This will all be headed up and led by Mike Pence, because he's the president of the joint session. The Republicans, funny enough, also hold the electoral majority in the joint session of Congress. And they have now a real pathway and an opportunity to deny the disputed Biden and Harris electoral votes from those states and to accept the ones for the Trump-Pence ticket. You're not going to see this mentioned. You clearly haven't seen it mentioned in any of the mainstream media outlets. I suppose there's a chance we may hear Greg Kelly on Newsmax, God bless him, talk about this on his show, but that'll be about it. Other than me and him, this is all you're going to hear about this whole disputed and contested election. So don't worry today. You heard Mitch McConnell come out and admit and openly say that Vice President Biden is now the president-elect. Congratulations. We hope to work with him. And that Kamala Harris, the first female vice president-elect, yada, yada, yada. Well, Mitch is going to have to, there's a good chance that Mitch will have to reverse himself on that, and that will be that'll be embarrassing for him, for sure. And but more than that, Mitch, if you don't already know this, Mitch is a member of the deep state. Now, he's done some good things during Trump's term, especially with regards to the the process of appointing conservative judges to the lower courts. Fantastic job that he and Trump have both done on that. But today's statement erases our support of him and puts us right back to the beginning as to where we were with him. He is a member of the deep state, and I think that before any elected Republican just throws up his or her hands and gives up, especially if it's before January 20th, we need to keep them in our journals of rhinos and deep state and globalist members who need to be eliminated from office by virtue of our vote. We need to fire them and get rid of them. Quell your minds about this third-party nonsense. If we do that, we're talking decades of ramping up and becoming viable. Trump has already reimagined the Republican Party with almost 100 million votes this time, you guys. He has reimagined it. The Republican Party is his. It's up to us to root out all of the rhinos, the globalists, and the members of the deep state. And a quick reminder about what's going on in the courts, ladies and gentlemen, especially Pennsylvania. They are voting or determining whether or not their constitution, their state constitution, was violated. Because in Pennsylvania, it clearly states within their constitution that in order to vote, there's only two ways you can do it: in person or with an absentee ballot. And in order to get an absentee ballot in the state of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you need to provide an adequate reason for that absentee ballot. It doesn't allow for mail-in ballots. It doesn't allow for ballots to be turned in 2 days after the election date. And so that's solid ground. That's what the Supreme Court says or calls standing. That case is still going on and hasn't been determined yet. So I just wanted to remind you about that because it's an important reminder, really, that the Constitution in Pennsylvania calls for only two ways to vote. In order to change that, the entire state would have had to vote on the proposition to change it. The state governor, the state attorney general can't go in and unilaterally change the rules of an election and allow mail-in ballots or delay the acceptance of ballots or say that ballots will be counted without signatures, whatever. They can't do that. It's written word for word in the state constitution. But yet that's exactly what they did. They changed the rules. So they would have to make proper notice to the people. The citizenry of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania would then have the chance to vote on it. The state would have to give them proper notice, etc. But none of that was done. None of that was done. The governor and the attorney general changed the rules, and that's what standing is in the eyes of the court. There is standing. There is reason. This case has legs. We can now proceed with it and listen to it. So if they end up prevailing, if the Trump team ends up prevailing in Pennsylvania, that means Biden would lose. So let's see what happens in Trump's famous words. Let's just see what happens. Also, I want to remind you about this. The only time that a president has supposedly lost an election, but his party won multiple seats down ticket, is this past election. Trump is the only president in the history of our republic to have lost the general election, but whilst his party gains multiple seats down ticket. It's never happened before. And given what we know about the math and the multiple hundreds of thousands of machine votes that were rendered and turned against Trump and in favor of Biden, there's just too much suspicion to think that, well, there might not have been fraud here. Look, we will all see what happens, but it looks to me as if evidence of the obvious is sufficient here. And to say that there was no fraud is beyond what I can comprehend as intellectual immaturity. It's astoundingly simple-minded to think that. So Mitch McConnell's voice, although it's a powerful one, is not an infallible voice. And he can speak for himself, but he certainly doesn't speak for true patriots, of which he is not. Mitch is not a real true patriot. Because on the one hand, think about it, Mitch says that the world is going to come to an end in Georgia if we don't get Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue elected into the Senate. Our world will come to an end. Yet he fails, on the other hand, to hold the line for the president in terms of all of this stuff that's going on in the Electoral College. There is no statute of limitations, as my friend Michael Johns would say. There is no deadline in the Constitution that says the Electoral College vote, when it's cast, is set in stone. That can all be up for debate on January 6th. We saw it in Gore versus Bush. For those of us old enough to remember, we saw all of this play out in the joint session of Congress back then. It's going to be similar, not identical, but similar in as much as the Republicans who hold the majority are going to cast dispersions and doubt upon the Biden votes because of the fraud, and they're going to throw them out. And they're going to accept these electoral votes from the Republican Party that came from all of the states that I mentioned at the beginning of the program. So McConnell ignores all of that about the Electoral College. He ignores that Georgia and Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada sent Republican electors to the Electoral College. And that on January 6th, there's likely going to be a contested election, at which time Pence, as the president of the Congress, and the Congress who as the Republicans hold the majority in that joint session, will give victory to the Trump and Pence ticket. It's a very real possibility. That's why you saw in Joe Biden's speech, if you're one of the 1,000 people in the entire country who watched his speech last night, that's why you saw him be so adamant and pissed off about there is no election fraud. This thing was done legitimately. Every vote counted. That's the reason he's so adamant and animated about that, is because they're scared S-less, if you know what I mean, because of this very process that I'm laying out for you. This is a multi-dimensional chess game. It's not a linear process. We had the same thing happen in the Gore-Bush campaign. 1876, we had multiple slates of electors be put forth by the Electoral College. There is plenty of precedent for this. The dueling elector scenario played itself out then. Much like today, there was huge suspected fraud going on back in 1876. And just as there is this time, the Constitution presents a pathway for President Trump right here, right now. And this should not be taken lightly. So anybody out there, I don't care if his name is Mitch McConnell or Vladimir Putin, if you think this thing is over right now, you're intellectually immature. Clearly it's not. Now, I don't know how it's going to turn out, obviously, but I know that it's not over officially yet. So let's see what happens. You got Nancy Pelosi out there lambasting the 126 representatives who signed on to the Texas lawsuit, and she called them, I think, and I'll paraphrase her, a disgrace to the House of Representatives. So what you have is Nancy Pelosi is saying and believes apparently that when we engage in due process, when we follow the precepts of law and order, we are a disgrace. That's what she said. That's what she means by that. Obviously, we can't do it. In their mind, we can't do any of this. We can't take advantage of every legal avenue that's out there for us. Trump isn't doing anything illegal. He's not doing anything outrageous, outlandish, or intellectually immature. He's following the law and the precepts set forth by the founders as written in the Constitution. Now, the important word in that is due process. This entire thing is a process. It's not called due immediacy. It's not called due right now. And to hang our hopes on the Supreme Court is not the intellectually mature thing to do. The Supreme Court in the Texas case was never our last best hope. It was one step along the way, but it was never the best step. We need to be pursuing the truth and the evidence by putting our faith in those things that lead us to truth. Now, we're doing this. People like Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood, among others, they're all pursuing truth and evidence. And the pursuit of truth and evidence is a process. So give yourselves permission to let the process play forth and play out. Like I said, it's a multi-dimensional chess game. This is not a linear process that has point A right directly connected to point B. And losing patience with the process isn't the way to go. I don't blame you for being impatient and a little bit pissed off. I am too. but hold the line. To give up and panic is not the right thing to do. To say this thing is over is not correct. It's not correct. The media and all of your liberal friends on social media can't call this yet. It's not over. Now, none of this feels good to conservatives, and I grant you that. Let me remind you of the words of Thomas Jefferson. Now, I'm going to try to dip back into my old Latin training here from the seminary days and quote Jefferson in Latin, and I'm going to butcher it. Malo periculossum libertatem quam quietum servitutem. I prefer the tumult of liberty to the quiet of servitude, said Jefferson. So basically what he means there is if you're living in peace with your government, if you're in a place of quiet relationship with your government, you're living in servitude. And it shouldn't be so. I think there's a lot of us who assume that, the natural state of existence between a people and their government is peace and tranquility and no waves and no ruffles, all this calm. But nothing really, according to Jefferson anyway, nothing could be further from the truth. The desires of men and people in power are almost always in contempt of the liberty of the people. And in a constitutional republic, those aren't fighting words. That's just the way that it is. That it doesn't mean that we're living in warfare with our government, although it can. And it means that we have what I've called in the last 3 or 4 shows that I've done with you guys, is that we have determined patriotism, and that we don't allow our frustration with voting problems to overcome us, but that we pursue the elimination of those rhinos, those globalists, those members of the deep state and the swamp on a daily basis. We pursue their elimination on a daily basis, not just on November 3rd or whenever Election Day falls. What we do of importance does not happen on Election Day. It happens on any other day, according to Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin said, controlling our government is not done by voting, but what we do on every other day of the year. And he is absolutely correct. So don't be a patriot who throws up your hands and says, well, our voting system is screwed up, it's broken, and no matter what we do, we always come out on the short end of the stick, and we've got all these rhinos in place. All of these people that are backing down from their support of the president. I'm tired of it. I'm going to start a third party. No. Ladies and gentlemen, it's what we as patriots are doing every other day of the year that influences our government, not what we do on Election Day. We are the right side in all of this for a reason. Conservatives believe in their hearts and in the reality that the way to improve our society is to focus on the moral improvement of each of us as a person, the individual. Each individual focuses on their own issues or their weaknesses in order to overcome them, right? You can say the same thing and use a sports analogy or an academic analogy. If you're a good student, you want to strive for those academics to achieve the awards that good academics can bestow upon you. If you're an athlete, same thing. I want to work hard and persevere, overcome, and triumph. You're not one of these children or these people whose parents gave them participation trophies just for showing up. That doesn't do anybody any good. The only thing that does is teach you how to have a meltdown when your issue or your political candidate or whatever didn't win, or when you didn't triumph. But there are, in these evil societies, those societies that are founded and based in fascism or communism or Islamic extremism, the focus on those societies is not the individual. It's focused on outside forces. See, conservatives in a free constitutional republic like America believe that the greatest battle faced by individuals is the battle of our inner forces, the struggle within of good versus evil, and how we overcome that. And when we do overcome that, we become grateful. And grateful people are, for the record, the happiest people on the planet. But the left, the members of the New Democratic Socialist Communist Party, in contrast to us on the right side, believe that in order to build up a better society, we have to do that through things that are done in the battle of moral feelings, or failings rather, of our society. So the New Democratic Socialist Communist Party will focus their efforts on things like sexism or racism or intolerance, xenophobia, homophobia, Islamophobia, all of those phobias, right? And all of the other evils they claim that plague our society. Yet they are the ones, and mark my words, despite all of that talk about all of those phobias and all of those things they stand against, quote unquote, they are the party that collaborates with all of those sins. Unless you agree with them, you are the problem. So one of the results of the New Democratic Socialist Communist Party's focus on all of these outwardly things is that it tends to make them more political than us. It makes them more political than those of us on the right side. Since they believe in fixing society comes from fixing things and things that come from outside of the individual, politics really for them becomes the way that they fix society. So they will demand that their politics is cast upon you to fix the problems of society. They will say that America's systemic problem is racism, for example, that because of our founding and our history, we are automatically racist. But for conservatives, we believe society's changed at the individual level, and this happens slowly, like in slow motion. It's not fast enough for the left. They can't stand to move in a process. They want social revolution, and they want activism. And those are the words that we often attach to the New Democratic Socialist Party. They want to, after all, remember, they want to fundamentally change the United States of America. But we on the right side are strongly, strongly, strongly opposed to that. We don't think that what our founding fathers gave us, they left us, was a mistake. We don't, and we don't think it's inherently racist. We don't think that we have systemic racism in America. We don't think that we're an imperfect, evil, well, we are imperfect, but we don't think that we're evil. We don't believe that there's any need of this transformation that you hear Chuck Schumer, we're going to transform America. Well, BS. No, we're not. We don't need to. This experiment is traveling along just fine, thank you very much. We have our bumps and our hiccups. We have our imperfections, our pimples, and so forth. We'll work through those. But because we as Republicans believe that our republic is not fundamentally flawed or evil, and when we juxtapose what our republic is actually today, juxtaposed against what the New Democratic Socialist Communist Party wants to transform it into, we can see clearly that we would become evil as a society, and we would become even more fundamentally flawed. Why and how? Just look at every socialist and communist country that either exists today or has in the past. They are evil by nature because they disguise it. Let's forgive everybody's college debt. Let's give everybody a living wage. No more rent. They make it all sound delicious, but it's the ruling class making those decisions and casting it upon the commoners, and it becomes evil. And there's only a certain group of people that survive and do well in those environments, in those societies, and it's the ruling class. Capitalism is the opposite. Everybody has a fair and equal chance to make it in capitalism. There's no escaping the truth that socialism and communism are evil. That's my point. We can't escape that truth. And if a society becomes based on those principles, that society itself will become an evil one. So the founders knew, correctly so, I think, that in order for a society to change, to become better, we've got to focus first on the individual. This is why the belief in divine providence and the development of human character was so important to the founding fathers. This is why they wanted religion taught in all of the schools, all of the universities. John Adams said, and I'll quote him directly here, John Adams said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." And on top of that, Benjamin Franklin added, quote, "Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom." But a moral and religious people and a virtuous people are not, according to the founders, we're not expected to just sit back and take it from the radical left, from the New Democratic Socialist Communist Party. We are not supposed to stand idly by and let them fundamentally transform America. That's not what we're supposed to do. It's exactly the opposite, and that's what Jefferson meant by "I prefer the tumult as opposed to the calm of servitude." We can't purposefully keep on blaming outside forces for the ills. We've got to look inward. And we can't stop purposefully living with determined patriotism. I mean, Sunday through Saturday, determined patriotism, 364 days a year. Then on the 365th day, we can go vote. But every other day is when the work of determined patriotism has to occur. Outside of Election Day, when we should be rooting out the rhinos, the globalists, the deep state members from the Republican Party. We can't let the flaws of one election, no matter how severe, how vast, or how coordinated these flaws appear to be, we can't let them cause us to forget the monumental achievements that President Trump has made in the last 4 years. But we should be asking ourselves, outside of this Election Day debacle, how have we been saving with determined patriotism our republic? Where were, for example, our so-called Republican elected leaders when local contracts were given to the Dominion voting system? In all of these states that are having problems, and even the ones that aren't, apparently. But I would wager you that every single state in our union had some problem or another. Where were our state legislatures? They shouldn't be acting only when these kinds of emergencies arise. They should be acting every day, every week, every month with determined patriotism to make sure that these kinds of debacles don't happen by reviewing the Dominion issues as they come up. And I put Dominion in quotes. Whenever there's potential for fraud, whenever there's potential for problems, the state legislature should be involved from the very beginning, not just when we want them to change something. But the same's true for us commoners, folks, us normal citizens. We have to have determined patriotism. It's not easy either. It's an effort. It's a process. We have to be vigilant in determined patriotism, and we have to understand that we've been given up now our wake-up call. From this point forward, we've got to be vigilant with regards to all of our determined patriotism and how we live it out every day besides Election Day. And don't forget one other thing about this past election. It was a massive red wave. The Republicans did multiple times better than those silly polls and the pollsters who should be defrocked indicated. And we came out vastly ahead of where we thought we would. So in all of this, I urge you to continue to have hope, to hold the line. Remember, as I said, all of those states submitted Republican electors to the Electoral College. On January 6th, there will be a robust debate within the joint session of Congress. Mike Pence is the president of the Congress, and the Republicans hold the majority of the electoral vote process in that joint session. There's every reason to assume, and nobody knows, including me, the outcome, but there's every reason to hope that that will be contested, and that the contested votes will be thrown out, and the ones for Trump, Pence, and their ticket, their platform will be accepted. So don't believe the nonsense. There is no officially elected president of the United States yet. You can say, I mean, the news and the media, and Mitch McConnell, they can all rant and rave. Vladimir Putin can congratulate Vice President Biden until their face turns blue. But as far as the Constitution goes, there is no officially elected president of the United States yet. To say yes there is only being intellectually immature. Now, let's pray for each other. Let's continue to pray for the Republic and for President Trump, for our Republic especially, that the divine hand of God and his divine providence, just as in the days of the founders, we invoke him and we ask for his guidance within our country. At the end of the day, we're all Americans. Let's pray for each other out there, patriots. Hold the line and be hopeful. And while you're praying for the Republic and when you're praying for Trump, don't forget to pray for yourselves. And let's pray for each other, please. I need your prayers, and I'll pray for you.